morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is June, and I am the Sustainability and Green Space Coordinator for the National Public Housing Museum. I'm really appreciative of this opportunity to create programming around the community land trust movement and to continue imagining radical collective futures. So before the event officially begins, I wanted to address some quick technological aspects for the event to run smoothly. The event will be recorded for those who could not be here, and we will send a follow-up email about how to access that after the presentation. For the first part of the event, your audio and video will be off, and for the best viewing experience, please have your Zoom to gallery view. And thank you to those who've already registered for a breakout room, but if you haven't registered yet, there will be a link in the chat to sign up so that we can have a smooth process. At 1:30, we will have these breakout rooms with speakers Zachary Murray, Anton Seals, and Erica Allen. At that time, you'll be able to freely ask questions and have a conversation. So thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to the event. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks so much, June, for helping to organize this event. My name is Lisa Lee, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Public Housing Museum, the first cultural institution in the United States dedicated to telling the story of the American experience in public housing. The museum draws on the power of place and memory to preserve, promote, and propel the right of all people to a place where they can live and prosper, a place to call home. I want to begin today's event with a land acknowledgement. I want to recognize the Indigenous people who have stewarded the land that we occupy in the United States. I am currently in Providence, Rhode Island, and so I acknowledge that I am on the traditional homelands of the Narragansett and Wampanoag peoples, and acknowledge those who continue to have an enduring relationship with their traditional territories. Please take a moment today to find out about the history of the stolen land where you reside. Acknowledging this history is particularly relevant given today's topic and the mission of the National Public Housing Museum to address the long history of displacement and forced migration, which is a narrative that links Indigenous people to public housing residents, to people of color and other low-income residents in search of affordable housing throughout the country. From settler colonialism to modern-day gentrification, the practice of white supremacy and the march of rampant and unchecked capitalism have terrorized people throughout the history of the United States. At the same time, there have been brave, fierce, and ingenious organizers, activists, and allies who have unleashed their radical imaginations to work against injustice and find creative solutions to create what Martin Luther King and Grace Lee Boggs have called beloved communities. The beloved community is not a lofty utopian idea, but a realistic, achievable goal that can be attained by a critical mass of people committed to a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth, where poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because of our standards of human decency. This program is part of the National Public Housing Museum's work to propel housing as a human right. With access to housing as the most pressing and urgent need facing the country today, the museum creates opportunities for all people to understand this issue, to ask what we have not yet learned from history in order for us to create a more inclusive foundation for the histories we should preserve and stories we can tell. We offer opportunities like this one to engage in developing innovative public policy reform that reimagine the future of communities, society, and the places we call home. Before I introduce our keynote speaker for today's teach-in, SHIRLEY SHERROD, I want to begin with a moment of silence to recognize the transition of a fierce warrior for justice, Congressman John Lewis. Let us have a moment of silence with a few images from his history before we begin. Thank you so much. Rest in power, John Lewis. Now we'll begin the teach-in that I've been so excited to host for the last few months. I have the great pleasure of introducing SHIRLEY SHERROD, a civil rights activist for over a half century. She is the former USDA Rural Development Director for the state of Georgia. SHIRLEY has borne witness to so much pain and suffering of organizing for justice. In 1969, she and her husband, Charles Sherrod, with whom she had a lifelong partnership, helped to found New Communities, which is considered the first community land trust in the United States, an enduring example of a beloved community. John Lewis, among many others, was one of the people who helped to found this community that reclaimed land and re-envisioned what it meant to thrive and prosper. SHIRLEY has been a movement leader and a movement builder, from both within and without. In 1999, SHIRLEY joined the class action plaintiffs in the lawsuit Pigford v. Glickman, which they won. And in 2012, with Catherine Whitney, she also authored a wonderful biography of her life, The Courage to Hope, How I Stood Up to the Politics of Fear. We are so glad to welcome and so privileged to have SHIRLEY SHERROD grace us today in this wonderful teach-in. Please, SHIRLEY SHERROD. Yay! I turn the floor over.
Thank you. And it's good to be with you this morning. And thank you for that moment of silence and the photos with John. John and so many others, including my husband, had a special calling. And they answered that call with their bodies and their determination to lead people in the fight for justice. I also want to acknowledge, before I go on, the passing of C.T. Vivian. He passed actually the day before John. And Connie Curry, who passed about 2 weeks ago. We're having a memorial, virtual memorial service for her tomorrow. So there's so many of the warriors who fought are passing on, and I wanted to bring those two in as well. You know, it reminds me of the days when we would meet and plan strategy, and then as we would leave to go out in the various counties to work, we would sing the song, Will the Circle Be Unbroken? And we would sing that knowing that any one of us could be taken out as we went out to do the dangerous work that had to be done during those years. New Communities was born out of a need to secure a better life for descendants of former slaves and others interested in developing a more just and equitable system for mostly rural and impoverished people in the South. Looking back at our history, you know, and our relationship to land, it was no surprise that owning land and having access to land was important to us. Land provided the resource that could be used to improve the family and the community's access to education, food security, and the ability to make better opportunities for new generations. What happened? I saw this firsthand in my own family. I looked at how my family, after slavery, somehow migrated here to this part of Georgia, in Southwest Georgia, and they knew that land ownership and getting an education was important. So they worked as a family unit to buy land, and ended up creating an area that to this day is still known as Hawkinstown, because working together, they were able to purchase, when you put all family units together, somewhere close to 5,000 acres. When the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed, and the demonstrations, the court battles, and other methods we used to push the government to enact these changes you know, to act the changes that to bring about the changes that the acts required. The question had to be asked, what now? What else is needed to move our people toward a more just and equitable existence? Land. You know, our relationship to the land is rooted in the history of the rural South. Owning land is crucial for a sense of autonomy. During the Civil Rights Movement, it was the landowners who could actually jail people out, bond people out of jail. Prior to that, the movement was crippled because you needed to come up with money to bond people out. But it was those landowners who could save the day by being able to bond people out of jail. So, you know, as we dealt with the question of what now, what else is needed, of course, you know, land, it cultivates a sense of belonging. It gives us the ability to feed ourselves and to make our families and communities better. So New Communities was born during that period when the question was being asked, what else is needed to move our people toward a more just and equitable existence? We had been marching, we had been beaten, we had forced some change, well, we forced some change. It wasn't always the change we needed or wanted, but we were forcing change, and therefore looking at what else we needed to build on became necessary. So New Communities was born giving hope and meaning to our people. So during the summer of 1968, during the month of June, 7 of our people, my husband was one of them, traveled to Israel to look at how they were resettling their people. They were there 2 weeks. We have a major report that was done looking at everything that they found, and we came back, they came back, and during the month of July 1968, we held our first meeting to discuss just what it was we wanted to do. And I'm gonna read you exactly what we said. It said, we agreed to work toward setting up an independent structure to buy, hold, and lease land in perpetuity to individuals and cooperatives for agricultural, industrial, and other economic and social purposes to make possible their earning a living, producing their own needs, producing for their own needs and for the larger society, finding creative expression for their skills and talents, educating their children, and enjoying all the rights, benefits, and responsibilities of free citizens. Now, we came up with that, and when we started working toward creating the organization, one of our members, Slater King, who had been a leader in the civil rights movement here in Albany and was from a very prominent family. That set of kings were not related to Martin Luther King, but that was, Slater was the only Black real estate agent in the area. I think he was probably the only one south of Atlanta, an insurance person. CB was our own lawyer. He was a Black lawyer. He had to represent all of us in the civil rights movement in this area. So with Slater being in real estate, he knew that there was a piece of land available just 25 miles north of Albany called the Featherfield Farm. So we made the decision that we would go after trying to get that property. And with the contacts Slater had and others, we were able to put together a 1-year option on basically 6,000 acres of land. It was 5,735 acres, more or less. We also applied for a grant out of the old OEO, the Office of Economic Opportunity, to plan this community. During that time, I think maybe you've heard of Soul City that was developing in North Carolina. New Communities was going to be another one of those, well, the funding would be similar to the funding that Soul City had gotten. So we embarked on a year of planning this new community. Now, one of the things we were told is that we had to use this firm out of DC that was close to the Nixon administration that was going to sort of assure us of being able to get the larger dollars once this year of planning had ended. So we started having charrettes with the experts working with us. And this was very, very empowering. People were coming together to talk about what it was we wanted in this community, what kind of housing, where industry would be located, what kind of health system we wanted, what kind of educational system we wanted, what kind of housing, how we would own the land and use it. It was just so, I can remember those sessions being very, very empowering at the time. Now, while we were embarking on this, also, the word was out in the area with local white people that we had our hands on this land. And they started from the very beginning trying to make sure we would not be successful with doing this. There were times when they would shoot at the few buildings or the meeting spaces where we were having. They started working politically to stop us and to block anything we were trying to do. But we had committees, and each committee, health committee, industry committee, education committee, housing committee, the farm, things were real. And there is a major document that we had developed, looking at how we would work with each other. We wouldn't use that traditional system of a manager that looked down on people or talked down to people, or like your old overseer on plantations. That we developed systems so that we were developing systems so that we would all feel just as important as anyone else on the farm or in the project, knowing we needed to have leadership, but that leadership could always be questioned. As we moved forward to develop the plans were finished in about a year, and that's when we really, all of the opposition in the state came down on us. And OEO, because local and state people had worked politically to try to block our project, OEO decided they could not give us a direct grant out of Washington like they had done for the planning grant. That they told us we had to go back through the state, the normal process, as they put it, meaning we had to get local permission for the project, and we had to get state permission for the project. They knew that would effectively kill this project, because there was no way white people were going to give their permission to move forward with this using government funds. And then Lester Maddox was the governor of the state of Georgia at the time, and he vetoed all federal money coming into the state of Georgia to our project. And there were so many who felt that without that help from the federal government, there was just no way we could make this work. But those of us locally decided we had never had our hands on that much land, and there was no way we were just going to walk away from it. So we then started the process of trying to raise money. We also started farming in order to try to make money to hold on to this land. And we actually faced foreclosure. Prudential Insurance Company had the first mortgage on the property. For a couple of years, we faced foreclosure and were able to fight it off. Slater King, who was very active in the beginning, was killed in a car wreck before we even finished the master plan. So, I mean, he was a major force. That meant Charles Sherrod had to really step up to try to help lead us forward. Finally, in 1973, we were able to get better financing and were really on a roll. We couldn't build the houses. We couldn't attract industry. We couldn't put some of the other major plans into play, but we could farm so that we could make money to pay the land debts and so forth. And then we operated the farm as we had planned during the planning session. We had a farm committee. The farm committee consisted of 3 members from the board of directors and everyone working on the farm. And there was a farm committee meeting every Monday night where we would review the work that we had done and make decisions about things we needed to do. The farm manager, everyone understood, had the last say as we were working during the week, but anything and everything could be questioned in the farm committee meeting. So we were growing peanuts, corn, soybeans, vegetables, sugarcane, cattle. We had hogs and muscadine grapes, and we actually cured a lot of the swine, the hogs on site, and were known for cured meats, as well as many other things here that we were growing on the farm. Things were going very well. We were able to expand the farming operation and pay the land notes and so forth. But then we ran into a drought, followed by a second year of drought. And after the second year, we went to Farmers Home Administration to try to get an emergency loan like all farmers were doing. And the guy said, "You get a loan here over my dead body." So that led to 3 years of fighting just to try to get an emergency loan with continued drought. So that finally, when we got it, they would not let us borrow what we needed to borrow, and they would never approve irrigation. So when you're in an area where you're having cycles of drought and no irrigation, we even had a contract to produce 1,000 acres of produce that was to be sold in the Northeast, but without irrigation, we could not grow, get the produce. Anyway, Farmers Home, their whole goal was to get a lien on all of our assets. And that's what they do even today with Black farmers. And that's how Black farmers have lost so much land, because you have to give them a lien on all available assets. Then they make your loan slow. You need to start the crop in January. It might be July if you get it at all when you finally get financing. And all of those tricks that have been used to cause Black farmers to lose their land were used and more on new communities to finally get the land away from new communities. So we faced foreclosure in 1985 and lost everything. When I say everything, it was everything. The new owner came in and dug holes and pushed all of our buildings in them. So I started working at that time with other farmers across the South through the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. And one of the main problems that I worked on was Black land loss. Marketing, farmers were shut out of markets in this area. White farmers could take a product in to be sold and get one price. And if a Black farmer could sell, they got another price. There were so many things that were done that to make us lose the land. And that's what has happened to most of the land owned by Black people. But to get us forward, new communities participated in the Pickford case, filed a claim in Pickford, and actually won after a 10-year battle. I can't tell you, I can't describe to you how it felt to lose 6,000 acres of land and then to finally win a major claim in the Pickford case that gave us the opportunity. We couldn't get that same land back. It would have been nice if we had been able to go back there, but we couldn't. It had been sold to one person, bought it and sold it to several, and the government, he bought it for $1 million. It was worth about $5 million. And then the government allowed him to borrow $950,000 of that. He only held it a short time before he sold it to others and made lots of money from it. But, you know, to move us forward, New Communities actually found more land after receiving the money in the Pickford case so that we could carry on our dream. We couldn't build the community we tried to build in Lee County, Georgia. We don't have the amount of land that we had there. Back then, it was said that New Communities, the landmass we had at the time, was about the size of the state of Rhode Island. If you can imagine that, that's how much land we had. That's how much of an opportunity we had to really make a difference for our people in this part of Georgia, and to set that example for land ownership for others, and home ownership and business development and education and so forth, that would have made a major difference in a part of the state that is still the poorest in the state of Georgia, and the worst, the hit area for COVID-19. In fact, Albany was a hot spot back in the latter part of March and April, and we're still dealing with that. But it was really, really bad. We lost more people than any county in the state so far. So if you look back, when I think back, you know, when you look at what's happening today with the political unrest, COVID-19, along with all of our needs due to systemic racism, you know, poverty and hunger, lack of affordable housing, an education system that leaves our children out or leave them behind with no clear path for most of them in inner cities to find their way out. We have had numerous political moments. You know, when you look at the period after slavery during Reconstruction, that was cut short. You know, Jim Crow and the lynchings. You know, we've got to really work smart and hard, because we can't let this moment be just that. We can't let this be just another moment. We've experienced too many moments and not enough lasting change. You know, when we came through the civil rights movement, we fought so hard, and there were gains, and we thought they were things that would last forever. I can remember going after the summer of 1965, going to the courthouse every week trying to register to vote and being thrown out of the courthouse by the sheriff, and could only register to vote after the Voting Rights Act passed that summer. You know, so I could walk in September, where all the way up till the passing of the Voting Rights Act, I couldn't register, but I could walk in September and register to vote. But now you fast forward to what's happening now, and you see that there are, you know, as we said back then, freedom is a constant struggle. So we have to take these moments and learn what we can, and then work so that we don't repeat some of the things that have happened in the past. You know, land, housing, training, a sense of family and community, love for ourselves, love for each other, the village. These are all things that we really need to continue to work on, continue to develop, continue to bring our people along, continue to train and retrain. This is our job for now. So thank you.
Hi, Shirley. I'm going to try and get someone to put my video back on.
Okay.
Jose, can you put my video back on? But anyways, great. Oh, hi there. Thank you so much, Shirley, for sharing that history. I have so many questions to ask you, but first, I want you to talk a little bit about sort of the daily life and texture of living in new communities. Can you tell me, like, what was it like to sort of wake up, and like what was a day in the life in new communities like?
Yeah, so having the opportunity to build, I mean, it just gave you just a special feeling to be able to walk. You know, prior to having 6,000 acres of land, we only knew of plantations in the area that had that kind of land holding. So it gave you a special feeling that you had something here you could build on that would mean something to our people. So no one had to tell you you needed to be somewhere at this time of the morning, because you were driven to try to make things happen. I can remember one of my uncles, my father's brother, who was a farmer and had participated in all of our farm efforts in Baker County. He came up to new communities. So he would say to me, he said, you know, you're a Miss Ann now. And I would say, for what? I don't own this by myself. This is all of us. No, you Miss Ann. Until he died, he called me Miss Ann, because he understood what it meant, even though he knew it wasn't my land, just my land. He understood what it meant for us to have that. The fact that we could work toward trying to build something that could really help our people. It just gave you a special feeling. You were driven.
Yeah, I love that. And for those of you who are interested in like the terminology of Miss Ann, there's a really interesting code switch about sort of language and sort of the appropriation of the word of Miss Ann to contemporary Karen. Let me ask you, when you were talking and describing what you were doing to rebuild systems of power and how you didn't want to just use sort of the same master's tools, I was reminded so much of Ella Baker's wonderful quote, you know, strong people don't need strong leaders. And of course, in these times when we remember the civil rights, we often fall into just remembering the charismatic leaders and not like the people. And I was just wondering, for you as a Black woman, as a feminist, as somebody doing this work, you know, what were some of the struggles, or what was it like to be a woman in the movement at that time?
You know, and I haven't talked about this much, but you know, I grew up in a family where we were trained to allow men to lead. The woman was supposed to stand behind her man, but in the civil rights movement, you had to step up to do the things you needed to do when that time came. And it didn't, I can remember one night, my husband and I, we had our daughter at the time. We had gone, one young lady had been taken from school. She and her siblings had integrated a white school, and they took them from school, the superintendent, and took all those kids to a youth development center in Albany. Didn't even tell the parents, because they argued with the white child on the bus. So we had to have mass meetings for almost a full year to get the oldest released, because they moved her from this youth development center to one in the middle of the state. So we had gone to this meeting one night, and we had this old German Shepherd dog. He slept in the car while we were in the mass meeting. And when we came out of the meeting, we came out onto the major highway to come back to Albany, and we're surrounded by about 5 police cars. And so the dog, who wouldn't bite, got up from the back seat to look out the window on my husband's side of the car he was driving. But when the police asked, they were a little afraid to approach the car because of the dog. Dog he wouldn't bite anyone. But as they asked my husband questions, I did not let him answer. I answered every one of them. And he'll tease me even now. So, oh, he teasing jokingly, this nigger woman was looking after her man. We had to step up to do stuff like that because he would have been the one in more danger than me or my daughter. And so we had to be on the lookout for things like that. And then we had to do the actual work. We were not we were leading, let me say. We couldn't call it that. But we were leading. I can remember out at New Communities, the things I had to do even toward the end, when things were really looking bad, when everyone else, had given up in their minds, and I just didn't. I fought right till the very end. That's the stuff we had to do.
You mentioned over and over again that, working on the land was a lens for not just sort of, housing, but also for education, for understanding policing. And I'm wondering about schools a little bit. We're so aware how much mainstream education doesn't teach the history that we should be teaching. The textbooks don't reflect the sort of tools and the stories that should be told. What was happening in sort of the schooling at New Communities? Like how was the education system being created? If you can tell us a little bit about that, I'm so curious.
So we worked with our children, even though and when I say our children, it wasn't just my kids. It was there were about 50 to 100 of them, and we did things with them. We taught them. We worked with them. We took my kids talk now. Oh, we had to pick these. They were doing things on the farm so that they could earn a little money, so that they could all go on trips. We took them to Disney World, for example. Shortly after Disney World was in Orlando. At one point, Eastern Airlines did a special thing. You could get the experience of flying for $15. So the kids picked muscadine grapes and did things on the farm, pooling their money so that they could go into Atlanta. They got on a flight there at the airport in Atlanta. They only flew over to Birmingham. But I'll never forget, I'm certain some of those kids who are grown now probably didn't get on an airplane again. But when that flight lifted off the ground, you heard this, woo, So they went to school, but we were working with them on the farm with the lessons from that. In groups on Sunday morning, even teaching them, having what we call Sunday school and so forth. So they had to go to the public school because we were never able to implement our plan so that we would have our own. But we taught them the lessons they needed to learn about our history, but also about working together with each other.
I love the way that you're describing chosen family and how important it is for us to extend sort of our bonds of relations too. One other question I have is thinking about, I read somewhere about the print shop that was at New Communities and how it operated as a cooperative. The National Public Housing Museum is now building a cooperative store that is our museum store that we want to own with public housing residents. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about the innovative businesses that were operating in New Communities in addition to the farming, like what else was happening?
Yeah, so let me explain too that the Southwest Georgia Project was the organization, and New Communities grew out of that work. So some things we could do on site, some things in Albany because of the Southwest Georgia project. And the print shop, see, one of the problems we had was getting information out to our people. That's why we came up with this idea of having a print shop and being able to produce a newsletter that was printed and distributed to our folks. We also realized the need to have a radio station. I look back and there was, I found a proposal for a community radio station from 1969. Now, we were not able to get it back then, but guess when our radio station went on the air? 2014. You know,
oh, wow.
One of the points I also want to make is you can't give up on your dreams. You know, maybe it didn't happen in 1969 or 1973, but we finally got a license in 2011. We had to fight hard for that, and we were finally able to pull together enough resources to get the equipment so that we could go on the air in 2014. These were all things, you know, the news media in this area was owned by one person, and he had the newspaper, he had the television station, he had everything sort of wrapped up, and that's why we could never get the true message out to our people. And during those years, we were trying to figure out, okay, how can we deal with that? So having a print shop. Now they also, from the print shop, took in business, funeral programs and printing for others. But the main reason for having it was to be able to do print and get the messages we needed to get out to our folks. When someone's house was bombed or something happened, we were able to respond to it.
Now, let me ask you, because in these times, there is a really vibrant conversation about how to generate Black wealth and the need to generate sort of equity. And, you know, back then, you all chose to sort of move in a cooperative framework instead of sort of embracing, you know, capitalism and other forms of generating individual wealth. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to make that decision and educate people around cooperatives and the distribution of wealth collectively?
Yes. It wasn't easy because also back then, I can remember you had these white insurance agents who would go and sell these policies and come around monthly collecting $1 or whatever from Black people. So they were going into their homes to collect this money for these insurance policies, you know, life insurance policies that didn't mean much, you know, just a few thousand. They were just, you know, anyway, our people fell for that. So they would actually be going into these homes trying to tell people that what we were trying to do at New Communities wasn't going to work. And if you get a house, you're not going to own anything. You know, we talked about a renewable lease on the property, you know, and so they're trying to tell them you won't own anything. So while we're still trying to educate our people and help our folks understand, we had that kind of thing going on too, trying to destroy what we were building. So I guess one of the points I want to make is that it was never easy. You just had to keep moving along and trying to get those examples set so that you could move forward. And while we were doing this, we were also having to respond to communities where the police killed a person or something happened in the school system. So I can remember at one point, one community would come and pick my husband up so that he could go and help organize in their city, in their county, because of school issues. And then at the end of the day, when I'm leaving New Communities, I got to go up there in all of these dangerous places to pick him up. So we were still having to trying to be available to the communities in this area, because people were used to that. When things happened, they called.
Yeah. I'm curious also about your decision to stay in the South. There's a lot of conversations now about Black migration, out of urban centers. And also, of course, I mean, places like where I live, Chicago, they were created by the incredible Great Migration in the 30s and 40s of African Americans coming up north and helping us develop all the culture that we know and love, and building so much of our sort of built environment as well. But you chose to stay in the South, and I want to hear a little bit about what went into that decision.
Yeah, so that wasn't my plan. I grew up on a farm, and so picking cotton, we owned our land. So the work was hard, but the work provided an income for us. In addition to the hard work on the farm, I grew up in a place called Baker County, Georgia. You all should look that up. The sheriff was known as the Gator. He had killed a number of Black people. Baker County had a particular history. Baker County is also home to many plantations. One of the largest ones is Itchaway Plantation that was owned by Robert Woodruff, who was the chair of Coca-Cola, 33,000 acre plantation. Highland Plantation, owned by the Mellons, banking family out of Pennsylvania, and I could go on and on about other plantations. And then segregation, the Jim Crow laws we had to live with. We would have people coming home from the North, and they seemed so prosperous and so free. So it made me want to decide that once I was out of high school, I would not even go to college in the South. I'd go to college in the North, and I would live my life away from the conditions here in the South. But during the month of March, during my senior year of high school, my father was murdered by a white farmer who was not prosecuted, even though there were witnesses. And I made a commitment on the night of my father's death. I'm the oldest of 6 children. My mother was 7 months pregnant. My mother and father had girls, and he had convinced her to try one more time for this boy. So she was 7 months pregnant when my father died. As the oldest, I felt I needed to do something. And I just prayed on the night of his death as people came. They were filling our house, trying to come and comfort us. I went away from everybody I had to come up with something. And then the thought just came to me, you can give up your dream of living in the North. You can stay in the South and devote your life to working for change. So I made that commitment on the night of March the 25th, 1965. And I have tried to live true to that commitment since that day. Now, I didn't know how at that point, but we started the civil rights movement in June of 65. That's when I met Charles Sherrod and later married him. My understanding is he told me, he met my sisters first. They showed him a picture of me and he said, I'm gonna marry that girl. So he chose me before we met and we married, and we've been married this September will be 54 years. Yeah.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Why don't we talk a little bit about this moment? I mean, you mentioned the police violence that you experienced and survived. And of course, in Georgia, there have been global uprisings now over the killings of, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, all throughout the United States. How are you seeing this moment and through the lens of the work that you've been doing? And what does the work look like now for you?
Yeah. So during those years, a Black person would be killed. And even though we would demonstrate, we would do all kinds of things to try to get justice for the family. As in our case, the grand jury refused to indict the man, even though there were witnesses. We tried suing him, couldn't go anywhere. The legal system just closed rank to protect any white person who did things to Black people, especially when you look at Baker County. So when you look forward to today, it's so, we've had white people in Baker County to say to us in later years, we didn't like what was happening. We didn't like what happened in your father's case. But if we had stepped forward, we would have been targeted too. So they didn't do anything. But to look at this day, to see so many white people finally, I'm sure so many of them realized early on, but they benefited from the system. But seeing so many willing to step forward now to say that this is not right, it hasn't been right, and change is necessary, and willing to step up to help make that change happen. I didn't think I would see this day, you know, so it's so good to see this happening. I worried early on when my son and his family moved back here for a short time when he was working for Procter & Gamble. His wife she is from Niagara Falls, and she tried to talk as if she didn't experience any discrimination there, but I knew that could not be true. But they decided to put their kids in a private school here. And my thing was, I worried about whether those kids would be able to see it when it happened and call it what it was. You know, the discrimination I knew they would encounter, you know, and so I would go sometime to pick them up from school just to look around, because if you're being told you haven't experienced any discrimination, how your kids gonna know it and not think it's whatever, it's them, you know, it's them being less than and so forth, their own fault for whatever is happening, I guess is what I'm saying. But I'm just so happy that it seems there's a shift and there's change that can come to having white people acknowledge their role and acknowledge they need to help make this change that is necessary.
Housing privilege and the long need for
right.
Operations that have been passed not only in Chicago with things like the Chicago Trust Memorial, but now across the country, cities are recognizing the history of injustice and stepping up in new ways, and calls to defund the police and to actually fund housing and education, I think is a really, you know, one of those things. We stand on your shoulders, Shirley. I want to give you maybe like, I always like to ask this as one of my last questions, you know, what are you reading? What are you listening to? You know, like what is the sort of art and culture and ideas that are inspiring you?
I'm seeing right now, I get started on one book and then I get to another one, you know, so my mind is just all over the place. But right now, my husband's health is also a major issue now. So that we're embarking, we have a master plan at the new, with the property that we have at New Communities. And because my husband's health has failed, I've had to step up. I can't be in the background any longer. I had to step up to do things that I didn't think I would be doing, like raising money. And after what happened to me with Breitbart and that whole issue with the far right, I've had to do a lot more speaking. So that's why I can tell you I'll start one book and then I'll get something on raising Satsuma oranges. I'll start another one, and then here I am trying to plant a
growing Satsuma style, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I read you all are growing Satsumas on at New Communities now, right? That's
yes, in fact, they're very good.
Ooh, good. And so if people want to find out about the vibrant life at New Communities, they can find you at the website, right?
Right.
Can you share where people can find you? That'd be great. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm actually working out of an office at the Southwest Georgia Project, the organization that we started back in the 60s. And that my email address is shirleymsherrod@gmail.com. And the phone number to the office is 229-430-9870. You can find me there every day. I'm just still, there's so much we have to do and just still plugging away at it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Shirley Sherrod, for joining me and everybody who has joined this morning for this first part of the teach-in. I want to give you a big clap and thank you for everything that you do. We are now going to take this sort of break to watch the film about New Communities, Arc of Justice, which is a really lovely 22-minute film that you can watch here for free. And it also, you know, very prominently features John Lewis, you know, talking about the work. So it's really wonderful. And then also for those of you who have not yet signed up for a breakout room, we want to encourage you to sign up for a breakout room for the next part of this teach-in, which is going to include the incredible Zachary, Anton, and Erica. And they're going to be talking all about sort of not just the land trust movement, but, you know, what is a land trust? How can we, what kind of work can we be doing on land today? And I'm really excited for everybody to be joining those breakout rooms. So thank you, Shirley Sherrod. Thank you to the MPHM staff for part one, as we launch into part two. Thank you.
Thank you.
There were many African Americans who were sharecroppers and tenant farmers in Georgia, in Alabama, in Mississippi, in Tennessee. And when they attempted to register to vote, they were forced off of the land. They were living on plantations, living on some other person's land.
You can help people fight for their rights, but when they don't have a base, when they don't have something that they own and they get kicked off the property, that's a really, really, really tough position.
There was this growing feeling on the part of so many individuals and leaders within the movement that if you had your own piece of land, you could do things. You wouldn't be dependent on others.
Where do you come from? Where do you go?
Charles Sherrod first went to Southwest Georgia in 1961 after the Freedom Rise to do voter registration in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Because you had thousands of low-income African Americans. They could not register to vote simply because of the color of their skin.
We were building a better life for our people. We were always doing voter registration, and that we were always doing direct action.
Albany, Georgia. We have been called upon and have heard the voice of democracy saying, get up from where you are and go to a land that I will show you all.
When they began to arrest us, we filled the jails in Albany. Thought that'd be enough for us to fill the jails. But they started sending our people to adjacent counties. One boy got his jaw broken, and one leg was kicked in her rear and lost her baby. A lot of violence occurred and a lot of hurt from our people.
My father was murdered March 25th, 1965. He was murdered by a white man who was never prosecuted. I made a commitment on the night of my father's death that I would not leave the South, that I would stay and devote my life to working for change. I was actually 17 years old, was not involved in the civil rights movement at that time, and didn't know how I would carry out that commitment. I've been hearing about this person, Charles Sherrod. I went to my first mass meeting, and I saw how he had led people there in Baker County to stand up. And they were saying all of these great things in the mass meeting and planning for more demonstrations and planning the other things to be done and singing. Oh, the singing was just great. And I remember being in that meeting and just crying. And I knew then that this was a way that I could live true to the commitment that I made. And by June of '65, we started the Baker County movement with the help of Charles Sherrod and others from SNCC.
I woke up this morning in my mind. Stay on freedom. I woke up this morning in my mind.
I was canvassing on the plantation. I knocked on the door of a man and his wife. They promised me they'd come to the mass meeting. They come to the church with their 5 children. They told me that they had been kicked off the plantation, had nowhere to go for the night. How many people whose doors I've knocked on got kicked out of their homes with their children, without a job? And I was partially the cause of it. So I lived in deep guilt and frustration. So that's how the spark of the need for land came to me. Seeing the land, just the land itself, the beauty of the land, the purity of the land, and the acknowledgement that all power comes from the land, and the land comes from God. All power comes from the land. Absolute power comes from God. And that's my ministry. It's still my ministry.
Slater King played a key role. He was the only black real estate agent in the area, and that's how we knew that the Featherfield Farm in Lee County was available. It was 1969, I believe, when he was killed in a car wreck.
Slater King and I were very close. Losing him was like losing a brother.
So devastating to what we were trying to do, which meant that Sherrod had to step up even more if we were going to hold on to this.
I hadn't raised any money in my life except a place to stay and food to eat. That's my only hustling capabilities. But I got on the road and kissed my wife goodbye. Said, I'm going to get this money. And I raised it. Somehow I raised it over $1 million.
The idea behind New Communities was to take civil rights one step further into economic independence and economic rights, using agriculture as the economic base. New Communities was near Albany, Georgia, in southwest Georgia. It was 6,000 acres of land. It was the largest tract of land owned by African Americans in the country at the time. So it was a source of pride.
I think Black people, even if they were not involved, felt proud that we could actually get our hands on that much land. You know, land meant power. You know, land established you as somebody.
It was a courageous and brilliant idea to bring people together in a new way of thinking and a new way of doing something. Cooperative land ownership, not just an individual, but a community. Many of us during the early days of the movement, we spoke about and we talked about, and even today some of us still talk and preach about the building of a beloved community.
More cooperative living, cooperative buying, cooperative selling, cooperative, just about everything cooperative.
We received a planning grant of nearly $100,000 from the Office of Economic Opportunity. So we've gone from fighting for our rights to now having rights and trying to do something with it. It was some exciting times, you know, you're planning villages, you're planning education, you're planning all of these things. You basically have a chance to plan a life and lives and plan ways to help our people.
We had a list of 500 families who were willing to live on this land the way we proposed. You would own your home, but you'd lease the land underneath your home. Some of us were naive enough to believe that having been called lazy, not up to anything, ignorant, that white people would praise us that we're finally doing something for ourselves, on our own, with our own money, with our own resources, and sticking together.
Just didn't think people would fight you when you were trying to simply help yourself. You're not asking them for anything. So I was really shocked at the opposition. I mean, they just came at us in every way to try to stop us, to block us, to do anything to get that land away from us.
They shot in our offices. They diluted our fertilizer. They wouldn't give us loans.
Washington had assured us that we would get the major grant to implement a lot of these plans that we had worked so hard to develop. But that didn't happen. Lester Maddox was governor of the state of Georgia when the money was officially vetoed. We couldn't build homes. We couldn't implement all of the many plans we had put in place, but we could hold on to the land by farming, and that's what we were doing.
We grew everything from strawberries and sugarcane and collard greens and turnip greens and grapes. Part of my responsibilities was to market the hogs and the cows. We grew seed corn and soybeans and everything that could grow.
We were doing quite well after a while. We could make enough money to pay the land notes and expand the farm operation. But then we had a drought, and then followed by a second year of drought. So we decided, just like all farmers were doing, to go to Farmers Home Administration to borrow money. The farm manager and my husband went over to the office in Dawson, Georgia, and the guy said, "You'll get a loan here over my dead body." And he meant it. We actually faced foreclosure, and SHIRLEY was out traveling around the country trying to raise money.
Well, we're about to lose our land. And it's a thing of a lot of pain to me, to my family, to other families that are associated with this project. And we don't see any way out of it.
We were basically kicked off the land, and what they did was they dug holes and pushed all of our buildings over in them. Every building but that main house and the shed that was on the property, they dug a hole and pushed them in them. So we were gone.
We want justice, Lord, come by here. We want justice, Lord, come by here.
So many black farmers were losing their land because they didn't have access to credit. We would meet and we'd talk about the fact that we have to do something about black land loss. We need to file a lawsuit.
We want justice, Lord, come by here. We want justice, Lord, come by.
One of the heroines in this story is Rose Sanders. And, here's this African-American attorney in Alabama dedicated to the idea that this can be done and that this case was triable and winnable. And she doggedly pursued it.
We didn't hear anything else on our case until the night of July 8, 2009. That's when our lawyer called our house. I answered the phone. She said, "Shirley, have you heard?" I said, "No." She said, "We won." She's all excited. It's 10 years now, So I said, "Really?" She said, "You want to guess how much?" I said, "Well, Rose is at least $1 million." And she said, "Shirley, is 12. So it was just so unbelievable. We were happy, and I think both of us cried. It was really, really something. We fought. We were hoping that we'd get something. But now we could continue with the dream. Someone suggested that we should look at Cypress Pond Plantation. So one Sunday morning, we came out here. We went in that big antebellum home, and I just had a problem with antebellum. Why would we want an antebellum home, a plantation? That place was once owned by the largest slave owner and the wealthiest man in Georgia. Then I started looking at this and saying, this is where we were supposed to be. What a statement to our people, that this could go from a slave owner to descendants of slaves.
We're just in the development stage We got the pecans in production, about 80 acres of pecans. We're getting irrigation put in on them. This year we expecting a great crop because we will have water. My major was horticulture, and I've had a farm of my own. Of course, I lost my farm back in '85 when we had a disaster, and prior to that we had a lot of drought. And at the same time that the new community lost their property. And that's why I'm here so determined to make things work and do whatever I can.
Losing the farm was torturous and very sad. But to have the settlement, to have this land, who could have predicted this road and this path? In some ways, it is the arc of justice.
We all own it together. It's ours. We can actually start here to help people understand land trusts, to help start land trusts. Maybe get people to listen to us a little more when you bring them to this place out here now. They know everything is possible. We couldn't have done any better, I don't think. Looking for a place after all of these years, after the loss we've been through, to really help our people heal, to help get them training, and to get them working together for the good of all.
Where do you come from, my? But if it hadn't been for, what if it hadn't been for my Canada? I would have been married a long time ago. I woke up this morning in my mind. It was stay on freedom. I woke up this morning in my mind. Stay on freedom. Woke up this morning with my mind. It was stay on freedom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Jordan River, who gon' help me to cross? Jordan River, who gon' help me to cross? Jordan River, who gon' help me cross? Oh Lord, one more river, one more river.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm really glad that we were able to watch that today, especially after Shirley's presentation. And so right now we will be taking we'll be transitioning to our other speakers who have joined us for the call. And we have three wonderful speakers with us today. And our first speaker is Zach Murray, who will be speaking about the politics and giving a basic overview of what the land trust movement is all about. Zach, are you ready?
Also, does this officially start at 1:30 or now? I couldn't remember.
So it officially starts at 12:30.
12:30. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So we still have like 3 minutes just in case people
Okay.
are taking a little break after the film and stuff like that. So like, I think let's just give everybody a couple minutes for the film. Just, take a, bio break or whatever, and then we'll come back at exactly at 12:30 Central to start. Yeah.
Yes, that sounds good. Hi all, so welcome back. So our first speaker and breakout room leader is Zach Murray. Zach Murray is currently working as a training specialist and practitioner with a focus on affordable housing development and finance for the People of Color Sustainable Housing Network. And he's also the former program manager with the Oakland Community Land Trust, and he is currently based in Oakland and joining us virtually. So thank you for joining us today.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon to folks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. So I wanted to share today a little bit about the work happening in Oakland, and much of this presentation was developed by the Oakland Community Land Trust. So let me just give me a second to pull up the presentation. So just to start with a little bit of an overview about what a land trust is, some of the features of land trust, and an overview of the work that Oak CLT is doing and some of the work happening to support resident and tenant-led development in Oakland, some examples. So to start, a community land trust is a nonprofit organization that acquires land and stewards it in perpetual trust for the benefit of low-income communities. And so most community land trusts work in the context of providing affordable housing and ownership to people, but some land trusts also work in the space of agriculture as well, and holding land for rural uses. In California, there are over 24 community land trusts and a growing number every day, it seems. There's a heavy concentration of CLTs in the Bay Area, of which Oakland Community Land Trust is one. But there are several in San Francisco, Marin County, all across the region, and again, growing every day. Right now in Richmond, California, as well as the unincorporated areas of Alameda County, just outside of Oakland, there are land trust efforts emerging, and in San Jose, California. So it's really taking hold. And in Oakland, we really link our work to the roots of the CLT movement, which you all saw about in the documentary film. The work began in an African-American community in the rural South in Albany, Georgia, with new communities in 1969 to hold land in perpetual trust for the permanent use of rural communities and to provide space for self-determined Black communities to begin to develop function and economic activity, and to respond to the legacy of sharecropping and racial discrimination. Leaders like SHIRLEY SHERROD, Reverend Charles Sherrod, launched a model that is still in use today. 50 years later, there are over 300 community land trusts across the country that are utilizing the model. And so to kind of visualize that model for folks, it involves at the core the community ownership of land. And that is executed typically through a 99-year ground lease or deed restriction that's imposed upon single-family homes, which are the bulk of CLT home ownership opportunities, but also limited equity housing cooperatives, which provide opportunities for ownership in a multifamily context and cooperative ownership of buildings, condominiums, which are subdivided ownership, and then multifamily rentals, which increasingly land trusts are providing in response to displacement happening in communities. And so the governance of a land trust is also a relatively unique thing in that it's a tripartite model, that consists of a third of the residents or lessees of the CLT land, a third residents of the neighborhoods, communities that the CLTs are serving, and then a third technical experts or mission-aligned organizational representatives. And so it helps to create democracy in the space of community development. And some historic community land trust models that you may have heard of include the Champaign Housing Trust, which was the first municipal land trust in the country, in that it was a partnership between city government and the Champaign Housing Trust, founded in 1984 by John Emmis Davis and the Bernie Sanders administration. It also had resulted in the control of 2,300 apartments, and they steward 620 owner-occupied homes. In addition, there's Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which is known because it is one of the only efforts to utilize eminent domain, and they were able to acquire over 224 units of affordable housing, as well as community gardens and space. And some notable names associated with Dudley Street include Mel King, and here in the Bay Area, Berkeley's own Gus Newport, critical in the organization's founding leadership. And so in Oakland, our work is sort of governed by this principle of common ground. We understand that land that is owned and governed collectively in community can provide a very flexible platform for equitable development, which has become increasingly important in Oakland, given the gentrification that we're experiencing. A lot of that gentrification has been rooted in tech booms that we're experiencing today. We experienced during the dot-com boom in the late 90s and early 2000s. But specifically, the foreclosure crisis took a very heavy toll on the Black community in Oakland, resulting in tens of thousands of home foreclosures, mostly concentrated in the flatland communities of East and West Oakland, which were the communities that had the largest concentration of Black residents. And so this is a map put together through research from the Urban Strategies Council in Oakland that shows coming out of the foreclosure crisis between 2007 and 2011, the number of properties that were acquired by investors. And so as Black folks and brown folks in Oakland were losing their equity, their properties were immediately being acquired by investors who converted these properties to rental. And because many of these were single family homes, or unprotected homes, they didn't have rent control. And so it led to a lot of increases in our market. Just as folks are being kicked out, rents are going up. And so OCLT really got its start in 2008 in this context, in which thousands of Black folks were being removed from Oakland, and in which the market, the rental market, was beginning to increase. And so to kind of visualize what a CLT involves, it involves typically the use of public subsidy, which most affordable housing requires, that basically takes down, buys the market price, and the subsidy essentially provides the ability for us to offer properties at an affordable price. So ideally the subsidy covers the affordability gap. It's a one-time subsidy in that we plug it into the properties permanently. And through a deed restriction, which puts a cap on the appreciation of the property, ensures that the properties can't be flipped, but are also available to the next family coming in. And so this sort of is a matrix that describes different methods of how affordable housing subsidies are provided. Typically, most is concentrated in the affordable rental space. You can think of programs like the low-income housing tax credit. On the other side of the spectrum here, you would have traditional ownership, programs like down payment assistance, for example, help, to ensure folks can get in with a 20% down payment. Sort of moving forward, one thing that's important, I think, about CLTs is the stability that they provide in the space of homeownership from delinquency and foreclosure. I think because of stewardship, meaning that the CLT works with property owners to maintain and manage the properties, but also buys down the affordability, I think, to eliminate a lot of the risk that is associated oftentimes with folks who purchase properties. In the case of Oakland, Black families were being offered really terrible mortgage products at the height of a bubble. And so they were getting inflated value properties at really bad rates. And so by diminishing the speculation and the role of that in the market, CLTs help to diminish a lot of the risk. And so returning to the context of Oakland, this is a graph that just sort of describes the volatility that speculation adds into the market. And it's mainly based off of volatility from land value. And so, Oakland, when it was a majority Black city from the 1970s onward, was actually a relatively stable market. However, by the time in the dot-com boom, the first dot-com boom, when the decline of the Black population first began because of gentrification, Oakland essentially became chained to the San Francisco market in terms of speculation. And the land values rose very rapidly. And then with the foreclosure crisis, declined very rapidly, very quickly, and then picked up again very rapidly. And so most of the value, we're now at about $800,000 for an average listing in Oakland, comes from land value, not actually the structure costs, which increases at a relatively natural pace. And so by removing the speculation related to land value, because we create community ownership, we help to really reduce the role of speculation in gentrification. And so the values that the OCLT promotes are community control of land and housing, permanent affordability, and stewardship. And so I wanted to just present a couple of examples of the work that OCLT was involved in, has been involved in to to support residents who are facing displacement. One of the notable cases came from a building in East Oakland that we now call Liberated 23rd Avenue, in which the owner, following a massive warehouse fire, residential warehouse building that resulted in the death of 36 people, a lot of the owners of mixed-use buildings in Oakland that were affordable buildings wanted to get out. And so this owner reached out to the residents and said that she was offering the building, but wanted to give them the first chance to purchase. The residents of 23rd Avenue got into conversation with all the developers, with the city, to figure out what could be done, and created a resident-led campaign. They connected with OCLT because of shared values of community ownership and permanent affordability. And the residents were able to raise $90,000. The OCLT was able to raise resources as well, including some city subsidies. And within a year, the building was brought into community ownership. It involves 8 units of residential housing and 4 units of of commercial space, and a quarter-acre community garden in the back. And so this was our first effort in multi-family properties and mixed use, but also demonstrated success in a model of residents being involved in models to support, or in residential preservation, affordable housing preservation. And so some of the keys in that case were a right to first refusal, organized and motivated residents who had campaign capacity, a willing owner who essentially extended the first right of refusal to the residents, and a diversity of funding sources. So an example of those funding sources, 6% from the resident fundraiser, equity from the Oakland Community Land Trust, subsidy, which is forgivable loans from the city of Oakland, allowed the building to be financed at about 56% of the value. That resulted in more success in mixed use space. OCLT was able to collaborate with Hasta Muerte, a worker-owned cooperative in East Oakland, very close to the first property. They were able to create a viral media campaign because they refused to serve uniformed police officers and were the subject of protest. And so that created campaign capacity crowdfunding, in which several high asset community members created a sliding scale fund in which they were able to acquire the building with interest rates between 0 and 2%. And overall, OCLT has been in strong partnership with organizations like ACE, the Alliance of Communities for Community Empowerment, and that has led to the acquisition of several single-family homes, including most notably the Mom's House, which was a campaign of Moms for Housing in Oakland, in which several Black mothers in Oakland seized control of a corporate-owned vacant property, and have now been able to move that into the Community Land Trust. And so OCLT is demonstrating a very clear model for stabilizing community and preventing displacement, and also working to create creative models for homeownership in a very high-cost community. And so I thank you all for your time and look forward to meeting you all in the breakout groups.
Thank you, Zach, for that presentation. And our next speaker is Anton Seals. And Anton Seals is an organizer, educator, community connector, filmmaker, and entrepreneur. Seals is the lead steward of Grow Greater Englewood, a social enterprise focusing on building equitable and resilient local food systems and community wealth building. Hi, Anton.
Hello. How you doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am playing triple duty right now. So I am thankful to be invited here to talk a little bit about our work. And I'm glad to be buffered by two incredible folks, Ms. Sherrod in the video, and then following me also my beloved sister Erica Allen, who'll talk a little bit about her work and how we're interconnected as well. So again, my name is Anton Seals Jr. If I'm a little out of breath, I've been up since 5 o'clock this morning doing a Black Lives Matter mural in the heart of South Shore, another community I work and organize in. So bear with me. But I wanted to talk to you, everyone, about some of our efforts, which are pretty much in the planning stages in terms of what we're doing in Englewood. Let me see if I can share my screen and we can kind of walk through over the next 10 minutes some of the work that we've been doing in Englewood. So just a quick example of some of our work here in Englewood. So we have been working with trying to put together a land trust. So what you're looking at now in this photo is a overview. And I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to some great students that we had help work on this last year to kind of collect some of our thoughts at UIC and have kind of walked through some of the recommendations that we've been working with in our kind of multi-dimensional plan in Englewood. So what you're looking here is an elevated trail called the Inglewood Nature Line, which is in the heart of Englewood, runs about 2 miles long. Which was an abandoned railroad, and we are developing it into a nature space. And it's part of the ongoing piece around what's happening in Englewood. So just to give you kind of to center you all, Grow Greater Englewood, we started this organization about 4 or 5 years ago, started as a coalition as a response to the Whole Foods that was being located in Englewood. Of course, Whole Foods is also somewhat semi-cold for gentrification. However, that experience did turn into something very positive because the community was organizing, and that is where Grow Greater Englewood kind of spawned out of, was that effort. The land trust, in particular in Englewood, is still very much needed. Our work has been mostly focused on this trail and also, launching vacant lots, which are the most vacant lots in the city of Chicago, are located in 2 of Chicago's probably most poverty-stricken communities, on the south side in Englewood and on the west side between North Lawndale and Garfield Park. So I'm just gonna kind of go through a little bit. This is a mural that we did a few years ago that we worked with some young people in reclaiming the space, a viaduct underneath the trail. So just a quick kind of overview of Englewood. Englewood, 63rd Street used to be the second largest business district in Chicago. Of course, white flight, followed then by, some disastrous policies that, echoed across many cities where you have, the kind of divestment from quote unquote the inner city, which are all been the kind of ongoing issues that we're dealing with currently in terms of segregation and redlining. You could arguably say Englewood is ground zero for some of that work. At the same time, I think the kinds of different organizations that are trying to address these issues in Englewood are plentiful. So that is something that's very much encouraging. And so that kind of resident optimism, the kind of collaborative spirit that is across different communities or sections of the community, Englewood is quite big. So I'm just kind of going to walk through that. This gives you a little bit about, the Inglewood Trail, and I didn't do, this is a larger report, so I'm just going to distill from it. But our work is really around, providing the trail for open space and community use. And then also to be able to provide access points for, this kind of multimodal connections. We're looking at this as an opportunity for the community to have job opportunities to actually build out this trail. Have the community also, steward and, create its own conservancy. So it's an ongoing stewardship of the trail and the land that's connected to it. We also see this as a larger kind of intersection between public health and public safety. If you don't know, you probably heard about Englewood in the news. If you're not from Chicago, people usually have a picture about you know, the violence that is, and you know, still raging in our community. This trail sits in the heart of where many of that, when many of the tragedies happen in terms of the intercommunal violence that's happening in our community. There are over 700 acres of vacant land in this one community. So I always kind of talk a little bit about, you know, land trust as a way, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but, you know, the neighborhood did not just get like this just because. It is because of the kind of ongoing lack of, you know, investment, but also the failed kind of imagining or thinking in terms of public policy that has left, you know, basically a whole community kind of ravaged. Another big point I'd like to point to, and it would be really good for many of you all to take a look at, is a documentary called Cooked that documents the 1995 heat wave, which is today one of our hottest days, in which it claimed over 900 lives in the city of Chicago, mostly elderly, mostly in this neighborhood. That was then followed by the Great Recession in 2006 and 7 and 8. This kind of gives you an overview of like where we are. This plots of land would eventually become the Englewood Village Square, which is currently being built out now. So we're very much encouraged about that because we have been working to advocate for the city to kind of get this done. And so I think one of the things I want to just talk about is just the vision. You know, how do we have adaptive reuse of vacant land in the Englewood community for affordable housing and this kind of cooperative urban farm ecosystem that we've been working on. So I'd like to just stay a little bit there between there and the goals around community land trust. And I think the big component of land trust is the word trust. So building, so there's so many different layers in terms of putting together land trust. And so while we're still pushing to get this kind of established, part of the barriers is that there's so much that has to happen in this one neighborhood. And of course, being in Chicago, there's a political layer that has to happen. For this one neighborhood, it's served by roughly about 5 aldermen, which is the local kind of, you know, voice in the city council, which makes it even more trickier because of those different political bends in different parts of the neighborhood. Again, looking at stewardship as, you know, from not only the concept of land, but also centering us as African-centered people, as, you know, one of the original stewards of the earth, and, you know, reestablishing that balance between nature and humanity, which has been kind of, you know, in the urban space, has been thoroughly attacked in many ways in terms of like the individual versus the community. So this kind of talks a little bit about where we are now in phase 1. We are launching these spaces currently. This has been an ongoing fight to make sure that this happens. And part of that is around the concept of, you know, the role of public and the government in, you know, being a catalytic presence. I think the previous administration, which was the Emanuel administration, was not as interested as the current administration. And even with the current administration, it still takes a lot more prodding and pushing. And when we talk about transformation and reimagining spaces, in particular, though, the très chic word of equity, you know, how do you put equity actually into action? What does repair, and by repair, I mean reparations, and what does that really look like in terms of, you know, what happens to these pieces of land in a system, in a capitalist system that also is being, that attracts a lot of vultures. So, you know, this balance between developing homes and having space for more farming and gardening, there are some tension points there. So we were still in the planning stage of kind of pulling everything together. So one of the things that we learned about to kind of prepare ourselves is just that people needed to see examples of this thing happening. And that has been where we've been for the last couple of years of pushing, because it would help, you know, propel our organizing efforts for people to really get it, because they need to see it. And by seeing it in terms of, you know, who owns the land, who stewards the land, who manages the land. In Chicago, there's a few layers of institutions that are already formed around land trust for urban gardening in the city of Chicago. That would be a group called Neighbor Space. And then the city itself also has a land trust model. But I think both of those kind of pieces don't serve the kind of unique needs from a local perspective of having local control and self-determining factors around what happens in their particular communities, which is a lot different from, how folks really think about development. We've kind of mapped out, some of the things that was just shared in the previous presentation, who some of the partners could be. We work with a lot of these organizational partners already, but this kind of breaks them out into the kind of different groups that we would have to have as we start to get into launch mode. The outreach and funding are a big part of it. This trail is runs in the center, and adjacent to the trail is where you see most of the vacant land. And so part of, thinking about what a land trust looks like at a real local level with people who are struggling around the kind of basic needs day to day, it takes and then it's not only just that, it's also that we're inundated with, there's so much organizing that has to happen. And when you talk about land trust in this concept, it's been a challenge around getting the different levels of buy-in. But there has been some movement in terms of groups like RAGE that advocated this for the city to create their dollar lot program, where a neighbor could then buy, a lot for $1. The issue with this program is that, there aren't any public resources for you to do any development of that parcel at a real community and local level. And that's always been a challenge, because that is usually the handoff back into private hands. The issue is, of course, in our community that the wealth and the access to capital has always been a barrier for small business owners and for Black homeowners. That's been well documented. So building out the different kinds of partnership, but also being really intentional around not attracting folks who also just see this as an opportunity, so that we don't spur even more gentrification. As again, I talked about the stewardship practice, which I think Erica will talk a little bit more about. So we are creating spaces for farmers who want to farm for businesses, who are being trained through these different farmer programs that are then looking to secure their own land to build out their own farm businesses. And then together as a collective, we're all working together so that we can have some presence in terms of scale. So that's one of the first things that we're working on that has kind of occupied most of our time. So some of the recommendations, we have to consider these different alternatives, as I just said, around just relying on neighbor space, which is kind of a quasi-city private land trust, which has been very helpful in terms of the allyship that we have in their leadership, but also troublesome in the other end because it's so connected to the city of Chicago and can change via either the bureaucrats who are in the Department of Planning or whoever is the mayor at the particular time. And most people see this as a layer of just, for community gardening and not for other resources. But what we've heard from community is that the community wants to have control over what happens to these vacant parcels that the city owns in their community. The consideration of bylaws that incorporate best practices, which I think this is why I wanted to participate to hear about, this utilization of mix of short-term and long-term leases. And then, again, this issue around, do you do some affordable housing and development? And how do you do that where you're building something that becomes an amenity but doesn't push people out? So we've thought about that in several ways in terms of, using the tax levy to freeze taxes so that homeowners that currently live there, most of the baby boomers who still own the majority of wealth in their homes, whatever little that may be, but they are still the largest demographic that owns and has that kind of wealth. Partnering with different groups like Erica's group, like Trace, which is a park district, working with young people, and activating spaces in the in-between time is going to be very important. And so I think, what I'd like to so this kind of gives you a little overview of some of that stuff. He talked a lot about governance, and this is something that, we had planned to really do this year, but won't happen until next year. Of course, everyone dealing in the global pandemic has kind of shifted our work to triage work in many neighborhoods in terms of servicing the needs. And we foresee that being ongoing for the rest of this year into next year, given that, you know, people were already behind the 8 ball and now the pandemic has also pushed, you know, so these kind of larger concepts around the land trust, which I think people are familiar with, in particular the baby boomer generation who are familiar with some of the things that happened down south. So it's not foreign. It's just that in the pecking order and priority of, you know, what's important, we've got to place this as a centerpiece around, you know, a way for us to maintain and control the wealth building in our communities. So that's something that's ongoing. But again, for Grow Greater Englewood, our focus has been on the farming aspect. We are still going to be working on trying to building out this membership and working with groups that already have a large resident-based membership. But again, like I said, you know, a lot of our work has been turned on its head, like I'm sure many of the people on this call. And then just in terms of getting the kind of buy-in from the financial fiduciary partners that you're going to need, you know, from lawyers' fees to, you know, the operating expenses, you know, and then who becomes the ongoing group that manages and stewards this. You know, we are, as Grow Greater Englewood, want to be a launching pad for those kind of, you know, to be able to help convene and allow for those groups to kind of, you know, take off in their own trajectory, play a role in it by helping bring resources to this model, which we think would be really transformative in this community. And these are some scenarios that we have. This is the kind of, you know, spatial look. So even rethinking about how the city's planning and look of a community should look. The designs of the, you know, common kind of Chicago. In this particular community, it's an older community built around, older in the aspect of, you know, being a Midwestern city in terms of its topography and the actual design of the different buildings. So you have some 2 flats, a lot of frame homes. So I think it's still a dream for the kind of design and architecture from people. And it's really trying to also call those different kind of resources that have come from these communities that have gone all over the country to come back home and do this kind of work or to advise on this kind of work. So we are looking for partners. So where we are now is, you know, we've been building these partnerships. We are at the point of like land acquisition. So we have right now, as a temporary stopgap, a partnership, an MOU with Neighbor Space, where we'd like to go in the next years to be able to have, you know, this Englewood Land Trust formed and be able to start to receive the land themselves, working with the Chicago City's Land Trust. So those are some of the things that we'd have to do, and also build out the membership and the governance of this space, and then also the actual budget and capital that would need to be able to execute. So we are very encouraged, and I wanted just to, you know, I'm sorry I breezed through such a lengthy document, but I wanted to share some of our experience in trying to get land trust in a real urban setting, the challenges and the opportunities that are still in front of us in order to kind of have the examples of like how we can take this multi-layered piece and really make it happen. And I think part of our big lesson is that the trust, T-R-U-S-T, is the big part of, you know, working in community where you have a community that is very distrustful of systems and government and institutions. So the big work is to be able to build that trust with individuals who are doing this work so they can see other neighbors and residents doing that. I'll stick around for any questions at the end, and I appreciate Lisa and June, you guys including me in this conversation today. I hope that helped satisfy some of the things there.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm excited for your breakout room later. And then we have our final speaker, Erica Allen. She is the co-founder and chief executive officer for the Urban Growers Collective, and she's actually joining us from her farm. Allen established multiple urban farms and agricultural training and education programs. She's passionate about social justice and working with multicultural groups in the elimination of racism and oppression. And before Erica goes, I just wanted to give everyone a reminder to sign up for a breakout room if you haven't already. All right, Erica, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. I am here from the farm. I'm going to try to get my desktop up here so I can show this few slides. Let's see. I think it's here. Let's see. Pardon me, guys, because I'm literally in the on the farm here. Let's see if this shows up. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can still hear you, Erica.
Hello.
We can hear you, E.
Okay. All right. All right. Can you? I don't know if you guys can see them. I'm going to show them. Here we go. Can you all see this?
No, we don't. We only see you.
Okay.
And you look amazing, by the way.
Why, thank you. Well, I'm just for time, because I know that there's limited amount of time. You'll look at me and I'll just look at my slides and present. And then hopefully I can share these with you all as a group later. So Urban Growers Collective was founded back in 2017, and it was really the sort of 2.0 of Growing Power Chicago, which we had been operating for about 16 years. We have eight farms on 11 acres here in Chicago. All of that land currently is either publicly owned or owned by other not-for-profits. So this kind of long-term issue around food systems in the city and being able to figure out how to create equity and long-term stewardship of land by and for folks who have typically either been marginalized from that land use or the ability to access power levers to be able to transition land, especially in cities, which I work within an urban context, but these same things can be applied to a rural context or a peri-urban context, is really about the power and the long-term capacity for communities to build wealth. So, you know, our mission is really rooted in this growing food and creating nourishing environments that support health, economic development, healing, and creativity through urban agriculture. So we really see the need for land not only as an economic or space for you know, food security, like true food security, meaning that there's people who are trained, skilled, and really kind of passionate and dedicated to growing food for and by the community as sort of a social security, like a real social security web. So when there's, you know, issues like pandemics or other kind of supply chain breakdowns, there's folks in the community who can really step in and activate and expand those growing spaces. So sort of like in that context, we do job training and education, we work on food access, and we do community engagement. I think part of our like long-term challenge is really kind of creating space so that new emergent next generation entities can sort of build on the legacy, because this is multiple generation work. This is not like Erica Allen or my father, Will Allen, did this and that's where everything, you know, starts and stops. It's really being able to have intergenerational passing of the baton so that folks can continue building this work and creating more and more space for everybody. And so for our part of this kind of long narrative, but really a reimagining of land and how we use it in productive ways. I really like the term and started coining it a few years ago about productive landscape. So thinking about our landscape, not just as a static kind of green space, but as from a frame of racial and social equity as something that can also be productive. And so my focus has been on public land because it's public land. And so we all own it, but also kind of digging into indigenous understandings about collective ownership of space, that no one can really truly own the land. And how do we kind of deconstruct that model that has really been systemic in separating communities of color specifically from the ability to matriculate well. So Farmers for Chicago is one of the kind of pilot programs that we developed to be able to create that long-term land use, but also to create community learning and peer development so folks can work side by side on their own farm operation, but also leaning into each other and build interconnected systems, and to be able to grow and train other folks who are coming along as well. But really just to solve that basic problem that I had when I started this work 20 years ago in Chicago, is just accessing land and not being, you know, and thinking about it in this very productive way. There was really nothing, there was nowhere for me. So I had to really create that space just to do this kind of what seemed like really basic kind of growing food. Like, well, of course we should do that. And that didn't exist, and it still is very challenging to get those basic resources in line so that folks are able to do this work. So one of the programs that we started last, well, we were invited to do, which was named Grounds for Peace by the city, really created the opportunity to do restorative justice within the community by beautifying lots for into a long-term wealth building opportunity for the community. So being able to suddenly in your community see a lot that's been an eyesore that, you know, hasn't really been for us, kind of that perspective, suddenly transformed by folks who may be, you know, viewed as somebody who wouldn't be doing that work, suddenly making that like transitioning these spaces to be beautiful, productive lots, but also to open up the ability for residents to be able to own those lots. So we were hoping, and we, you know, that was our goal, was to move in that direction, but we really hit a lot of roadblocks and a lot of resistance from the city of Chicago around opening that program up. And so, this conversation around how to create and align with other cities who are trying to do the same thing, where we can do this transition of land. And of course, like, we understand cities need tax revenue, all that kind of good stuff. But, you know, there's a restorative time frame that really, you know, needs to be considered as far as folks being able to put sweat equity into a lot and being able to own that lot and to utilize it to be productive or to build a house or do whatever as a form of, and I will say it because I believe in it, as a form of reparations. And one can look at this in a lot of different ways. Like, if we're having folks coming in to a program to transition their lives, and they've had multiple generations of you know, impacts of the fallout of public housing, dismantling of public housing, of those social systems, of those resources, a chronic and you know, very intentional inability to access capital and fair housing, being able to just have lots that are strategically located, that are part of a healing process, but also part of a very well orchestrated and funded wealth building and homeownership program in the context of also having green space. Is what we are hoping will happen. And I think we're getting closer to that with the work that's happening in Englewood with RAGE, with farmers who are in our program here at the farm that you're seeing me in, where farmers are incubated on a 1/4 acre lot that they're able to, or plot, because it's a big kind of almost rural farm, and are able to then transition and expand their operation back to Englewood with Englewood Village Farms, which we're part of as well. So we'll be a contributing farming entity within that area. And I think lastly, I would add, with all of these strategies, and this is something that's going to be emergent in the next year, 18 months, there's a need for fertility, to have clean soil, to have enough of it, to be able to take one of these lots and quickly transition it into productive use, even if it's just for temporary use, but as long as the community is designating that that is how it will be used. We'll be having an anaerobic digester that is owned the majority ownership by me, and then also allows for community ownership as well, with some of the transition of shares that I have put in place at a couple different levels. So the idea that we can have profitable, exploitive companies or enterprises that can also really bring the capital in, and that we're, rather than having to go through a whole series of challenges, being able to convince not only a program officer, but other kinds of community-driven visions that have never been able to be funded or funded at a scale that they can actually really begin to build wealth for the folks running those enterprises that we're moving into that space. And we're doing all of this through land. I mean, we're doing that. This is the wealth of this country and the world is built on agriculture. Unfortunately, it was built on exploiting labor, but if we are able to sort of remove that piece, the exploitation piece, and utilize our relationship with the earth and the land to produce food, produce goods, produce hemp. Hemp is, an amazing product that so many different things can be produced out of that, and that we're able to bring and control that manufacturing within our own communities. Those are all of those jobs that are all connected to agriculture. So this conversation is really important. Having land, having fertility, having the ability to take care of our basic human needs first, and then to be able to build up from that. This conversation around how this relates to housing and the kind of resolution, if you will, of historic redlining and structural racism. And that is where I will end my comments, without you all seeing my slideshow, because I don't know how to do that.
Thank you, Erica. And so now we will take a short 5-minute break so that we can transition to breakout rooms. We will open the breakout rooms in 5 minutes, and then 10 minutes they'll begin. And so if you have any questions, or if you haven't joined a breakout room yet, this is your final moment to do so. And if you have any questions, please message us, and we look forward to the breakout rooms. Thank you.
Are more public spaces for the practice of democracy. We have to create alternative space to push democracy, and the CLT at its best can embody that. And so I think that's kind of what is at play, is that the public housing that has been privatized through programs like RAD, or through conversion to low-income housing tax credits, which is a private-public partnership model, but privatization essentially, even if it's in nonprofit hands. It's a charter, I call it charter housing, charter schools, charter affordable housing. And so, we have this public disbelief in the public doing anything that then results in privatization. And these low-income housing developers, nonprofits, have our folks signing 74-page leases that say things like, you can't go do laundry in your pajamas. You can't walk the halls of your unit in your pajamas, right? dehumanizing things that privatization results in a lot of times. And we know public sometimes does as well. But I think that that's what we're fighting for and needing to be changing. So a lot of times people who are well-intentioned in the affordable housing space are pushing a privatization agenda, are pushing an agenda that requires this enhanced financialization and essentially the creation of a product from affordable housing, where someone has to be able to generate a profit in order for this to be viable. That's what we're up against. And when you come in and say community control, community land, community ownership, you're pulling against somebody's money, because there's a great profit stream generated for people, public and nonprofit and for-profit, in this provision of affordable housing. In the provision of Section 8 vouchers. Someone in the market is benefiting from these things. And we have a totally market-based solution mindset to the provision of affordable housing at this point. And the CLTs are against that sort of market vision.
Cool, thanks. All right, we have around 5 minutes left. And so it's Gabriella and Nita are up next. So Gabriella.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. My name is Gabriela Roman and I'm from Chicago. I've spent most of my career addressing barriers to home ownership, and of course, the biggest one to tackle has been affordability. But my question is mostly as a resident. I live in the Logan Square community, which has seen a lot of displacement pressures and a significant population loss of longtime residents. And there's some local groups that are just formed a community land trust here in Logan Square. And my question is a little bit technical. When you develop the resale formula, can you discuss what went into the design, what were the considerations, and just share what is your resale formula like?
Thank you. That's a really great question. Our resale formula is essentially changed to the consumer price index, which kind of shows like the inflation value of things, or at a minimum 2%. So each year the property gains a 2% addition or whatever the consumer price index was. And the thought there was that people should be able to generate value, but it should be a natural generation of value, not one that is on the whim of whenever you're able to sell, or what the land value speculatively says could be built if you demolish what's on the land right now. They vary, but tend to be very similar to that, in that they allow for some really slight appreciation. Some, have a resale formula that allows for you to share the appreciation. So you would sell it at market, but then the appreciation gets reinvested into the property. So it really varies based off of your market conditions and what the goals of your land trust are. What I should say is that we got started with single family homes in 2008. That was, 12 years ago. None of our homes have resale, which I think speaks to the stability that they've provided to residents in a very expensive market.
Who is it for? Right? So there's always this tension that I think is really difficult and that's why you have to have organizers. So you have to have people who are able to be, the conductors or symphony kind of orchestrators to help mend the two different, one is to solidify and clarify the ask and the demands, right? That a community is saying, to put that in front of, the elected powers, but it's also an opportunity to build the power to force an agenda or the idea into these other spaces. So I think that that's been the work, that's the unseen work that even has us at this level talking about land trust and cooperatives as another structure, as an economic tool for shared ownership. And I think that now's the time for, much more room to have that happen.
And then we're gonna go with Michelle next, and then we only have one more question after Michelle. Please limit your questions to 2 minutes or less. We only have 10 minutes left in the group, guys.
Thank you. Thank you, Anton. I don't live in Inglewood, but I live Inglewood adjacent. I live on 53rd, just on the other side of the boulevard. And I'm wondering if, is it part, or could it be part of the plan, or would it, to have the homeowners who do live in the community, is it possible to like deed our houses or land or the lots to the community land trust as another way of kind of acquiring land? Is that, will that be part of it? And I guess that's it. It's my question.
No, that's definitely, it's in our report. I just kind of skipped over that. So yes, and I think part of our charge has been around, there's a few things that go along with that. Is embedded in terms of like estate, planning for your, the next generation, right? So thinking about like what happens if you die. So when we talk about these things are like in real time. So usually that, those kind of financial services are tied to a certain economic rung. There are people in Englewood, of course, who are, this community is very astute. You have to think about who occupied this community, in the late 60s, early 60s to 70s when it went from white flight to an all Black community. These are folks who are in the domestic working arena, who work 2 or 3 different jobs to buy a home, right? So they are astute, but, it's also what happened, I think, during the war on drugs is that generation that was under the, the great generation, right? Mm-hmm. Who migrated, a lot of them had issues with addiction. So you had families that are now dealing with issues of addiction. So I think that there's still an opportunity, because that's part of like why we're doing these other pieces, because that gives us the tool to say, not just to talk about it, but to show like, look, this is possible. And that's why we've been on the city's ass so tough, is because you need to have that kind of convincing. It's not going to be a presentation. People want to see that the work is being demonstrated, and activating spaces that are sustainable is the best way to do it. And I think that you're totally right. That has been our so we want to earn the trust of people to know that they are leaving their land in the hands of people who are skilled and capable, and those things are very important. So I agree 100%. That's part of our ongoing plan.
Thank you.
Time, and for people to trust themselves and trust you and trust what you're doing. And I think it's a very important part of the kind of pillars of like sustainability, when people use that terminology, along with community, like, I think it is the hardest part of the work. And I think it is the most, Jason kind of alluded to this, democracy ain't easy. Because everyone has different ideas of what they want to see happen, and creating spaces where you can accommodate that, also clearly share a vision, and that everybody's down with that vision, but maybe there's a bunch of different ways to get there. That is what you kind of want. But I think a lot of times when people of color talk about define who you mean by community, they're really speaking to white folks coming into Black and brown communities doing this work. So, which I think it's really important to be able to define what that means, and then make it transparent. Like, I think that is like being truthful and transparent. It is like, you can't, even if people don't like what you want to do, people will trust you because you've been honest. And I think when we use certain words, we don't necessarily have that accountability. So sorry that wasn't such an easy answer, but that's my answer.
No, it was good.
I just want to thank Zach for helping to lead the our breakout room. It was really great. I also really appreciate the participation of everybody who was there. And I do want to say that Zach has helped with other people create an amazing toolkit for land trusts. And so I think it's on the MPHM website also, and it can be emailed to you as well. Yeah, great. Who are we turning this over to? Is it Tiff Beatty, their amazing Director of Arts, Culture, and Public Policy at the National Public Housing Museum? I think she's actually going to, there she is, yay! Great, I'm gonna turn it over to you, Tiff.
Sure, and I think June's gonna join me as well. Just wanna make sure everyone is back from their breakout rooms. Just giving everyone a second to come back. But while we're doing that, we have a slide up that gives you a little bit of information, and we'll talk a little bit more about what those slides are all about. But first, we want to make sure we properly close this event, and who better than June, who has orchestrated much of this behind the scenes and has been with us behind the scenes, just making sure everything goes smoothly. And so I just want to give June opportunity to thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you to our really wonderful speakers. I think it was such a phenomenal event, like one of the most interesting webinars that I've been to, not to brag on other webinars, but I think starting with Shirley's presentation and having such a vibrant conversation with Anton, Zach, and Erica was really an amazing Saturday for me. And so thank you all to our wonderful speakers for joining us. And thank you all for participating and making this day so great. Thank you all.
Thank you, June. I can't overstate, excuse me, I can't overstate how amazing June has been throughout this process. So I just wanna, if you guys can give her a little hand clap, either emoji or just send her some good vibes. Programming is difficult, especially in these times. And as you all know, we're going through a lot, including a pandemic. And it's important for us to be connecting and to stay connected. And at the Public Housing Museum, the National Public Housing Museum, actually want to stress that we are a national museum. We're the only cultural institution devoted to telling the story of public housing in the United States. And our mission is to preserve, promote, and propel the right of all people to a place where they can live and prosper and a place to call home. So we know that land is a part of that, but we also want to emphasize the public aspect of that, and recognize that public services and public engagement, civic engagement is very much a part of our mission, and connecting folks, especially in our home city in Chicago, is something that we are definitely committed to, and some of our events coming up are spotlighting some of that mission. And so I just want to make sure that everyone knows about these, and we're also going to post in the chat some information for you. So just post in the chat. I'll tell you first about 36 Questions for Civic Love, which is a project that we've been collaborating with a consultant named Sarah Farron from Dialogic Consulting. And we have assembled 36 questions that we believe strangers can ask each other and can develop or start to develop civic love. And we've defined what civic love is, but we also want to invite you to help us define that. We really think that the work of the heart and the work of connecting is important to our larger conversation as a city, and also as a nation and as a world. And so starting off with connecting two of our favorite Chicagoans, Director of the American Library Association, Tracy Hall, who is also owner of Rootwork Gallery, one of my favorite people, and co-owner of Big Jones, Chef Paul Faribach, who's also a James Beard nominee and very active in the community. And so those two folks are going to talk together in a presentation mode, so everyone will be able to watch them and ask each other and answer 12 of the 36 questions that we've put together. And then we'll invite folks to go into breakout rooms to talk to each other, to ask each other those questions. So if you enjoyed talking to strangers, if you enjoyed connecting in the breakout rooms, this is definitely a program for you. And then I also want to highlight Out of the Archives, which is a part of our oral history programming. For those of you who are familiar with the museum, we have the largest oral history archive, and we are, around public housing, and we connect peoples who have lived experience in public housing to opportunities to share their story. And so we do oral histories and we do programming around that. And so Out of the Archives is our monthly series, and the focus of that is sports and athletics. Every month it's a different focus, and we spotlight some videos, and that will be on Facebook Live. So please visit our website and learn more about those programs. We're also on social media. Shouldn't be too hard to find us, but please do reach out if you have any questions, and we will make sure that you can join our next events. So thanks everyone again. Special shout out to our speakers and everyone who engaged in the breakouts. We really appreciate you, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.